Sheila here with Sirius Talis Moon. This is Moon Hour Mars night. Moon is applying to conjoin Pluto. And Mars is sextiling Moon from Aries. Ascendant ruled by Mars, midheaven ruled by Saturn. Um, there's a thing about Pluto in Aquarius that it's not Saturn in Aquarius, meaning Pluto here doesn't incarnate a timeline. It purges and rejuvenates. Saturn is in Aries, and so Pluto is purging limitations to sovereignty and incarnating structures that support individual sovereignty. This is why the Pluto ring dropped when Saturn hit the conjunction with Neptune 0 and 1 degree Aries. That was the biggest structure that was in the way of individual sovereignty, individual business, individual real estate. Aries is individual real estate. I have this eureka as I'm speaking with you. If you do real estate business, this including an individual from being able to have real estate, any individual, any bloodline, any origin, any color, any gender, any sex, then you're not doing real estate. You're undermining yourself. This is why the private equity market is expected to be shaken from the core. People are like, oh, there's going to be financial crisis. We're going to be able to buy a lot of estates. And that will be confiscated after you spend the money. Are we going to take a loan from the bank? You want to be on an Epstein list? You want to be on an Epstein list. There's a difference. If you took a loan from the bank to buy an investment property, or if you took a loan from the bank to buy a residence, changes a lot at how you're being looked at during due diligence. There are actually accountants' advices that tell it to people to take a look at the time of the purchase. The people that are ready in advance and have sudden like, oh, there's a lot of estates. They're going to be looked at differently in due diligence. But the person that has one apartment that they live in and runs into something, they're an individual. Now that applies to business as well. The person has been missing papers and has been escaping trafficking, wrote certain emails and so on and so forth. They're an individual. And taking, by the way, taking measures against them is a crime against humanity. We're at war. But the owner of a big company they're looked at differently. If somebody has a global company, or if somebody has a company that sells to the global market, they have less issues to get, let's say, and when it comes to getting, I don't know, subsidies, a lawsuit was got to, BlackRock asked for subsidies. They said, there's no problem, but you're going to have to give up a couple of properties. And before we subsidize your employees, you can sell out your assets. Okay, rich folks takes loans against assets. But when the poor folk does that, it's like, okay, there's this one asset. Even if we sell it, it's not going to be suffice. So, because Saturn here is due diligence. Now, even when I talked about the topic of slavery or modern slavery before, even when people thinking they're going to buy a slave or something, what were they buying? First of all, they're committing a crime against humanity, so they're already eligible to be killed with zero consequences, right? If a person is human trafficking, they are committing crime, and human trafficking is usually money laundered in terror and crimes against humanity. So now, some of these people may be young folks. They may be young rich people. They're like, oh, I got a deal. Oh, I need 30 slaves. I need this and this. I need that. Kind of like you're trafficking people committing crimes against humanity. And then the other aspect, how's the people right now? We've had COVID, we had the war in Ukraine, we had the Israel-Palestine war, we had the global Palestinian liberation slash intifada slash, I don't know. So people are sick from the medicine, sick from the war, traumatized from the economy, and traumatized from being mistaken to being a Jew or Palestinian. And that's just, I did not even say a word about, Congo. And there's their own sense of colonialism. Israel buying properties in Kenya. I think it was Kenya looking to have some sort of a village that will blend the teenagers, the Jewish teenagers, and the local teenagers. I'm like, what? Do they know how much ritual abuse there is in Israel? But that also tells me that there is ritual abuse in the, I don't know if it was Kenya or the local country. Like, how come these folks arrived? Now, think about Pluto and Capricorn. People begin to take their power in the face of gaslighting. At first, it was like their boss or their date, and then it was like, well, their parent. Um, think about it. If a parent grew up in a certain world, that would be their coping mechanism, and children are like, well, that's gaslighting. That's a narcissistic pattern, or that, and And they meant that colloquially. They didn't mean it psychiatrically. And the psychiatric institution began to get mad, and they were like, well, the medical gaslighting. Then it ended up with COVID, you know, and the ability to call somebody crazy for stating a pattern lost its effect amongst the people. By the way, there was a time where the politicians, I talked about this Gemini stage. So they're like, they saw this things with gaslighting psychiatry. It was like, oh, that guy is a crazy. I was like, that's not how we mean that, but that was lovely. um, then Pluto, if I think about Pluto going from Capricorn to Aquarius, was like, oh, I was talking about decentralization, the entire Capricorn, and then some of the big banks that were doing ritual abuse are decentralized, are cooperative. Um, but I was predicting it, but that Pluto would be the power of the group, whether the positive power of the group or the negative power of the group. Um, I went to a form of ritual abuse on that onset. Um, and that means that the 0 degree Pluto would be purging the limitations to sovereignty of the individual in the face of those hidden groups. It basically, now here's the thing: I have no idea who were the people, but all of them lost the mandate of the heaven, regardless of me, because they were hoping to get something from that is meant to backfire. And sometimes people only find out when they see, oh, wait a second, what was happening when Saturn was here? What's happening now? What companies are losing their glory now? Also fiscally. Um, this is why Pluto in Aquarius is the persecution of the secret societies. We are purging the limitation on the individual sovereignty, but also on the community. We can't have co-housing or intentional community when people are, with fraternities and sororities mentality. We can't have astrological community with that, and then AI takes over astrology. I was one of the people they were tortured, but they were involved with harming me. I heard them saying, "Oh my God, they're going to want my profession too." Like, they were in aromatherapy, reflexology, and then they became like a doula or something. Pluto is psychology. Aquarius is science. And so people are up to speed with the science of. They might even know how to name it. They might be like, oh, they're trying to create a cult-like trauma bond. I'm seeking secure attachment. That's not secure. What they offer is not secure attachment. They can't expect me to be loyal to that. People identify blame shifting a lot faster. Who is the person that is doing weird things? That one person that is the one astrologer that talks about MK often where nobody does, to a crowd of 27 subscribers that barely show up because some of them are the spies from networks and lost their previous channel. Well, the last videos seemed like an attempt to kidnap them where they were astrally raped. Or the people that say, hey, that person is so and so and so and so and so. From there, still having reached channels that could have been preserved by, for example, ritual abuse in someone. But with Aquarius, there is the fall from grace of these practices. If I watch, let's say, Mspiracy, and some weird watchers come and try to attack me, taking on the face of Emma, for example, I don't immediately assume it's Emma. And if I say the name, it means that I turned to these people. I asked them to talk about MK Ultra. I asked them to call the declassification. I I talked about MK Ultra. I turned to them about the effects that happened to clients. I gave all the benefits of the doubt, and I still addressed the structure that they could have been tortured. It's not a viable business model where people's clients are targeted. We also see how people coming from lineages, let's say if Mspiracy come from lineage where there was a king that became known by hunting witches, basically hunting women that tried to protect themselves from his warlockism. And then, oh, we have an ancestor that is, at least, and I think is Mspiracy's a cis woman, and is actually talking about fire codes to get out of the matrix. So shout out to Emma. Um, oh, and by the way, I also give a lot of shout outs and a lot of, like, if I, let's say, buy something from a business and I'm targeted, I don't assume that that's the business. So a lot of what was called targeted individuals. Think about it. We opened with the Epstein list release. What was the Epstein list doing? Practicing very weird occult, sacrificing people, trafficking people, um, castrating people, um, in interface with the intelligence and classified projects of each country, somehow having a weird. It's kind of like even if something was a black box where the input is some child is trafficking and the output is a genocide. You can say, hey, there is some process here where there's an input of children being trafficked and an output of crimes against humanity. I was like, yeah, children being trafficked is crimes against humanity. Of course, it compounds to something. So if the input is children being trafficked or people being trafficked, and output is crimes against humanity, it means that the process, the hidden process, somehow compounds war crimes or compounds crimes against humanity instead of, for example, reducing crimes against humanity. Yeah, it's a very computational statement. It's a very Pluto and Aquarius statement. Also, education becomes a lot more accessible. That's the time where the industrialization turned people literate with the mindset that they would read the menu of how to um, take care for the machine. But they also learned how to read um, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, legal documents, philosophy, the social contract thinkers, popular books that became interesting also about, when Feynman can write a book about Los Alamos. That's interesting. And then a person studies politics and governance, or like we're studying an entire course, and there wasn't a chapter about Los Alamos. There was a chapter about the A bomb, but there wasn't a chapter about Manhattan Project. Hmm. And there wasn't a chapter about the oil giants. There was a comment like, hey, look at the wealth of nations. And it wasn't a chapter about the training of the intelligence. No, that chapter we had to beat live. Not because we were intelligence, but because the intelligence was doing that to us. People being indoctrinated with religion in the colonizing project. So they're expected to be indoctrinated with a particular version of religion, but they're not expected to read the Bible. What do you mean pregnancy is punishment and the man rules the woman? That's creating inflammation. That's creating what you white people call psychopaths. What kind of a child would be born to a family where the man rules the woman and the woman is pregnancy is a punishment? At least she has some thistles. The one time people actually want to have sex in the Bible ends up in exile. When Eve says to her man, "Hey, let's get it on," he said, "We can't eat that apple." Well, what do you know? Then they begin to make clothes from fig leaves. They begin to be creative. But if the Bible is presented as, oh, they begin to become ashamed that they are naked, so they want to make clothes. Nah, dude. If that apple is eaten and people feel like getting it on, what if we decorated our bodies with the tree leaves? That could definitely be a part of the story of creation. How did we come to know how to create clothes? We ate from the tree. We ate for the tree. That was a really nice fruit there. And we look at the leaf and we say, somebody said we can wear that. You feel like getting it on with somebody, you pick a leaf up. That could definitely be the story of creation. How did we end up with the Bible? How did we end up with Genesis? And this is also the decade in Pluto that talks about the exile from heaven. When the Bible itself is exiled from heaven. The people that thought that they are going to, I don't know, buy certain people or whatnot, what they ended up buying. The Gen Zers that wanted to unalive themselves. You wake up somebody had to bring so and so slaves. They wake up in the morning and I have 30 slaves. I have 30 slaves. They wake up in the morning and have one. Where is it? They formed a death cult and mass assassinated, and then they killed themselves. They were 30 yesterday. They were 30, but they were 30 Gen Zers. What about the millennials? I know they're old, and the millennials were the people that sparked what the Gen Zers would. They were the Gen Zers are sitting upon the shoulders of giants. Let's say the millennials are the giants. They had Uranus in Sag. They were looking at Abraham sacrificing or willing to sacrifice their child, and they were like, "That's the founding father of our culture." The guy's a madman. No, but they were having a pact. They were having a genitalia mutilation to an infant. This is psychopathic. Did God rape Avram? Why did he do that? No, it was the costume in pagan times. And then Avram was running into a God that says, "Oh, we don't. What the fuck is this world?" Um, we'll see how Uranus and Gemini go, because if in COVID there were still the people that were vaxxers and anti-vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, da 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 da, and so on, it's kind of like, well, Gates is being litigated for a reason. So as much as I don't know what was before, but as much as COVID goes, um, and I studied philosophy of medicine, of holistic medicine, of conventional medicine. I don't know about like the concept of, but when it came to COVID, it's evidence that the litigations that happened. But Warren Buffett didn't withdraw out of. I wish he had withdrawn out of Epstein on time. Like, just think about the power Buffett would have had if he would withdraw out of Epstein in 2005 or so. The fact that the disposition was not even, is basically, the fact that he was not even thinking to do that, and he understands very well what he's invested in. That's that's literally his branding. But then he withdrew off of the Gates Foundation. Our human rights are not charity, they are basis. Shout out to Parkrose Permaculture that says, hey, people believe that they get money from they don't get money from the government, they get their taxes back and they get their opportunities back from the economic hitmanship of classified projects. A person that lives, let's say, on income-based housing, and usually they are trafficking survivor, they're not living off of the money of the public that works. They're living off of the opportunities that were denied to them and are theirs. And if they were harmed and crimes against humanity were done on them to prevent them from being a living, functioning, making a life or making a living human being, then it's their opportunities. And you say, oh, what about, oh, but you're saying, oh, Ghislaine Maxwell could say, hey, my opportunities would, if she was born into some sort of network cult, yeah, her opportunity to have secure attachment, honoring of her erotic, non-erotic self, not to be raped as a child, were taken from her. If she stands up to, hey, those opportunities need to be there, let me tell you, she'll get those opportunities. This is what I spotted that nobody was talking about. When I talk about housing first, independent of ability to work and to believe the patient, because that's not just a testimony, that's intelligence. I talk about the right to exit violence. Because I know very well every person that, let's say, is an activist is one kidnapping away from becoming the subject that they are activists against. We're thinking about Uranus moving to Gemini and labor unions. Those The targeting individual project is an attempt to prevent people from unionizing. The community that sacrificed its people can't unionize against AI taking over their jobs. For example, astrologers. And if they do, they're going to have to be held accountable. For example, when it came to ritual abuse, the people that came out, the people that were in the physical rituals, they were also offenders. And the people that talked about that, about the structure of the rituals, basically were beginning to ask for the right to exit violence. Because the structure of the ritual is somebody is being tortured to loss of sense of self, then they are torturer, but it was not, and if they're not being tortured and targeted, and the testimony is being believed, then now they have, and they need residence, then now they have, but one such cases, and you can go to Ramsdyke channel, is Peggy Van Roy, which those who can afford can make a contribution, because she talked about, she was in the physical rituals, and by the way, people would have dissociation. Anya Week talked about it, where people would have dissociation, so they wouldn't know. I did not say a name without saying they were probably tortured because that's the structure of how these things work. And what they were tortured to do was to attack, traffic, ritually abuse, and sacrifice person. So people were astrally raped. People had to flee apartments. People, this is Yvonne van
Was de
Rijnsdijk.
gast in aflevering
By
2.
her channel,
En
people can donate
mocht je die willen zien,
to Peggy Van
dan
Roy
kan je
having residence.
terugkijken op mijn YouTube kanaal Just Yvonne.
And that's the thing. If people put a person in a situation where they are to be basically sacrificed and then tortured, then then that person doesn't really have anything to do but to either expose the situation like Peggy Van Roy, that was also what happened around the Me Too. People were like, well, they can't really just move to another job. They can't really litigate because the higher up the rank, the more infused in the system. All they can do is speak, taking into consideration that, hey, the people that attacked them weren't born offenders, but this type of practice needs to stop. And then the people that were targeted, they're not gonna just, oh well, why don't they want to work? Do you have a job that is, and even if a person is entitled to lifelong compensation for a reason, they are dealing with a trauma of entire society not being basically seeing what's happening, swiping it under the rug is satanic panic. Um, and by the way, big shout out to the people that did see and that did call it out, and um, but people definitely identify that sort of group dynamic. If Capricorn was about gaslighting and began to look at, hey, why don't the people hold the person who committed the offense accountable? Then in Aquarius, they begin to identify exactly those dynamics. When something was working on a big hoax, like I said with Aquarius, they try to fool. Now is the timeline where they try to fool all the people all the time. But it's also the timeline where that's being exposed. Because the type of hoax requires it to be a global hoax. Think about border control. You can't have a person carrying a passport to one country. But the big criminals go out without passports. I'm not talking about people that escaped the country and they had a passport, let's say, of one country, um, and then, I don't know, the birth certificate or the passport was lost or something like that. I'm talking about the people that passed through the airport without showing a document. Okay, this is why when I was flying to Netherlands, I went immediately to the immigration saying, hey, I got my Israeli passport, but the Dutch one is not with me, and I know that I cannot just cross the border, so I come to you. Then they were so kind, they were offering me 3 cups of coffee, and an entire system of a biometric passport was not able to identify me until eventually the Israeli embassy answered and they had the paper from when I was 16. And my father just approved the first passport. Now that means that if people are harmed when they cross the border, it's going to be a global phenomenon. Probably it's going to result in a lot more bombings in airports. It's not the airport that, how should I say that? Because, and that's going to tell us something about the nature of bombings. It's a false flag. Because like, oh, there's so much security. How could there be, let's say, 9/11? They recruited somebody that was harmed probably through passing a border. And then that person 9/11s. Now it says it's not just a plane and so on and so forth. Yeah, but the principle is the same principle. Person doesn't get themselves messed in something they could be so easily exposed for at any given time and be literally hanged for money. They do that when they are tortured. They do that when they are no longer having a sense of self. Oh, this undermines and exposes every single mechanism that MK Ultra is working for, including blaming people for things that they didn't do. Yeah. How does it begin? Well, the cure for psychosis or schizophrenia is believing the patient, abolishing the targeting of the patient, which means declassifying classified projects and declassifying classified technologies. Transparency around where was the money funneled from classified projects. Who are the astrologers that were making money by targeting individuals? Who are the astrologers that were talking about receiving a cow for present, where cow is cash cow, which is a part of Targeted Individuals Project? And why were they particularly targeting the people that spoke against the Epstein ring or the Epstein endeavors by holding accountable behaviors like the Me Too? Why were they the people that, if they did not take a course, is because they were traumatized from academia's trafficking networks? But then they are so shocked when people talk about what if we have an A bomb that doesn't have margins? Why? Because that would be the only immediate death, mass death, and the amount of people that do these practices are is so big that it's mass death. It's kind of like it's euthanasia for everyone there. And now people are like, oh, but they thought that that's how they're gonna make the money to grow children. Really, what will the child have to do? And then, of course, the field will be taken over by AI. The Me Too was also where the logic of, oh, I studied so and so years and so on. Okay, what children did you rape and traffic? Because if you have a certification, in my time, one could get a first degree, but they couldn't get to a second degree. The second degree is where they would get them in Israel. In United States, I think it's already the first degree that would have to be in sororities and fraternities. And I talk about this problem in academia. Silent, silent wave. And by this time, people understand that they're not the only one that it happened to them, and the people can see it. It's transparent. I was seeing how people already identified that certain tarot and energy readers keep people in certain timelines. The reason I sometimes do an energy reading infused with astrology is because I want to offer something um, that shifts that timeline. And this is what I began this broadcasting with: is that people try to keep people in certain timelines, but the timelines doesn't fit anymore. The timelines doesn't fit anymore. And what happens when the talent doesn't fit anymore? They can't siphon the energy. And what happens? So and so company been litigated for accountability regarding the child trafficking that went on their platforms. And also, people are not willing to participate in these projects because how does targeting individuals project works? They need to siphon energy. So siphon one energy, then a person wants to unalive themselves. They have that, then they nothing to siphon. And or they've done the shadow working regarding the issues that they try to trigger, let's say. And so they'll go to the person. Now, if a person participated in targeting an individual, that means that they are the best target. They got to the point where they were targeting an individual. Now, people that were building on having a legacy from these practices, let's just say that was not the strongest foundations. And this is where people, let's say, take the field because Aquarius is so associated with astrology, but it can also be seen as psychology, nuclear science. Israelis were taught that if there would be micro ABOB sent, they can spend 48 hours under 30 meters below in a shelter, and then they can walk out and everything is fine. Pluto also rules nukes, and Saturn meeting Neptune rules radiation. Why did they say that? Because they expect that if